How's everyone? At this time, I'd like to call the Anacortes City Council meeting for February 1st, 2021 to order. Ms. Hunt, would you take the roll?
Mr. Carter?
Here.
Mr. Young?
Here.
Mr. Walters? Ms. Cleland McGrath?
Here.
Ms. Moulton?
Here.
Mr. McDougall?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to item 2, which is announcements and committee reports. And 2A is my COVID-19 update. So for this evening, Island Hospital reports that they have had a total of 11,575 COVID tests given. Of that, they've had 240 positive cases and admitted 41 people to Island Hospital, and they've had no deaths. To date, Island Hospital has administered 1,642 vaccines, and they ask you to please check the Island Hospital's website for information on when scheduling will reopen on the COVID vaccine for phase 1B, meaning anyone over the age of 65 or over the age 50 that's living in a multi-generational household. And they've had a slight delay because of the way the vaccines have been rolling out. So as soon as they know what their allocation is for the next week, they'll open up the website and take appointments. Like, so if you make an appointment like on a Tuesday or Wednesday, they'll start vaccines that Thursday or Friday. They've got to keep the appointments very close to the arrival of vaccines to keep the counts accurate. So sometime in the next couple of days. So if you need a vaccine, go to their website every morning and check. And to date in Skagit County, we've had 3,873 positive cases. We've had 50 deaths and 233 people hospitalized. Compared to the end of December 31st, we had 3,105 positive cases with 40 deaths and 194 people hospitalized. So that's what's happened in the last month. The county health department estimates that we have approximately 345 current positive cases in the 98221 zip code area. In Skagit County, they have given out 10,140 vaccine doses. And that was as of on the 27th, so last Friday is the latest date I have on that. Skagit County Public Health Clinics are full for the week of February 1st, and they ask you check back to the website this Friday the 5th for information for next week's scheduling. Vaccine availability will depend on the adequate supply provided by the federal and state government. In the Washington state, we've had 316,000 cases and 4,369 deaths in the state. To go forward from phase 1 to phase 2, we must reach a metric, 3 out of the 4 metrics. And the 4 metrics are as follows. Over 10% decreasing trend in the two-week rate of COVID-19 cases per 100,000. And we are currently at a 69% increasing trend in our region. Remember the 4-county region that we're in now? And we have to have over a 10% decreasing trend in 2 weeks of rate of new COVID hospital admissions per 100,000. And we currently have a 16% increasing trend. ICU occupancy has to be less than 90%, and we're at 58%. And COVID-19 test positivity rate has to be less than 10%, and we're at 9%. So currently we're meeting 2 of the 4 metrics. And I've had many questions about the governor's last week. He changed some of the bigger counties have moved forward. And I think because of their numbers and population, they met 3 out of the 4 metrics. And it's a little frustrating for us in a more rural county, but that's what happened. In the United States, we've had over 26.3 million cases and 442,000 deaths, and worldwide 103 million confirmed cases with 2.24 million deaths reported to the World Health Organization. Anacortes School District also sent me an update, and they're following the new guidelines from the public health officials. The district will move forward with phased-in return to in-person learning for secondary students. Middle school students will return to a hybrid in-person learning model next Monday, February 8th, and high school students will return to the hybrid in-person learning model on Monday, February 22nd. There will be information nights for middle and high school parents and students this week on Tuesday afternoon and Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. And let's see, I want two other small items. This is a housekeeping item. Tonight, as I adjourn the meeting, would you all stay on for a moment, the council members? They want to get a screenshot of us for the state of the city doing council meetings in our new online platform. And then I had a citizen reach out to me this week that is involved with the Kiwanis Action Club. And this group of people have run the e-cycle electronic program, so they recycle our computers for us. They've done it for years and years. They provide a great service for our community, and it raises money for their program. And this is a junior group of the Kiwanis Club. They have been in a free facility for a long time, and they're losing that site. So if anyone has an idea of where this group could have their recycle program, which I'm not sure, there's a couple Saturdays a month where you can bring your computer to their site and they will recycle it for you. So they're looking for anybody in that community that can provide a site for this club. So if you know of anyone, let me know and I'll pass that on. And that completes all of my COVID and other announcements for this evening. We'll move on now unless there's questions. Item 2B, our Finance Committee update. No, is there a report?
Mr. Walters is trying to say something. His audio is really low.
Okay.
I can speak to the Finance Committee.
Okay, that would be great.
Finance Committee met briefly mid last week, and we primarily were discussing the reporting system. And actually, I don't have my notes in front of me for it right now, so I forget its name. But the reporting system that we had reviewed a few months back, that a number of cities around the state use to show like budgets and things like that. And I think we're, while we're interested, we're still kind of looking at it, and I don't know that we've come to any conclusions. We do know that the finance department themselves, they've put together a really nice tool using the spreadsheet capability that you get with Office 365, where you get kind of a front-end presentation and you can kind of drill into different sort of budgetary line items, and like it'll basically kind of hot link through the through the spreadsheet to get you to specific pieces of information. So that's a really nice tool that they've kind of developed internally. And then as far as evaluating sort of that more graphical tool that's got all the sort of pie charts and things like that, that's still kind of an ongoing. And then we briefly touched on the end of year 2020 finance update that that Mr. Hoglin's going to be delivering tonight anyway. So I won't cover that. We'll let him cover it later.
Okay. Any additions? All right, we'll move on then to item 2C, our Fiber Committee update.
Mayor here.
McDougall.
May as well go again. I have better notes on this one. And thank you, Ms. Shute, for the report. The Fiber Committee met last Thursday as well. And on the first order of business, we determined, that the project itself is actually really has terrific momentum, and we've kind of got all the project management and construction procedures and installation procedures down. So we're going to scale back the fiber committee to just a monthly meeting going forward. Second item is we're expecting the Economic Development Administration grant, that $2.25 million grant that is tied to construction of fiber backbone sort of in the fill-in areas east of A Avenue that we haven't gotten to already. So they're going to be reviewing that February 8th, we believe. So we should get some sort of word fairly soon after that. As far as the aerial expansion for 2020, this is the areas on the map, the 1 through 6, that are mostly east of A. That's all the sort of backbone construction is fully complete, and the team has been doing installations in those areas furiously throughout January. And I think we're at like close to 60 installations here for the month of January. And we're in the process of designing that west of Anacortes Mine Road section for the 2021 construction. So NOAANET is actively designing. We're targeting construction of the backbone sort of core of that West End build to begin in April. So our customer installation teams, they're going to have plenty of work between now and sort of May, June to do customer activations through kind of the areas 1 through 6, and then they'll be able to pivot in the latter half of the year, be hopefully activating customers in the West End. Then quick numbers, we're up to 553, as of Thursday, 553 active customers on the network. This is 463 residential, 90 businesses. And our take rate, our market share in the CBD is 46.3, Old Town is 44.1, M Avenue is 40.6, and then the areas 2, 3, 4, and 6 were up to 28.3. So our take rate in the fully installed areas were well past the target 35%. So kudos to the fiber team on that. Great work and great feedback from the community on the customer service, things like that. So well done.
Thank you, Ms. McDougall. Any other comments? All right, we will move on then to item 2B, our Public Works Committee report. Turn your volume on.
Whoops. Mayor Gear.
Walton.
Hi, thanks. Our Public Works Committee just met prior to this meeting, Mr. Walters, Mr. Young, and staff and I. And as usual, we had a lot of really fascinating things to talk about. The first one being the Outfall project. And within the next week or two, Council will see a resolution to waive the competitive bidding on the project. We're doing something a little different, which will be explained in greater detail next week when we see the resolution. But basically, the city will not choose the contractor just based on low price. Because this is such a big and vital project, we will also choose based on the qualifications of the company. So it's a little bit of a different way of doing things, but we'll hear all about that when the resolution comes before us. It should go out to bid in March, so things are moving right along. We talked about the wastewater treatment plant and the solids handling options that will be coming before council. And for our incinerator replacement, there will be about 17 options, some of which will fall by the wayside pretty quickly, but we and the public are going to get sort of a wastewater treatment 101 session. So we kind of all are operating from the same baseline of understanding of what needs to be done and how we can best solve the problem, or not the problem, but moving forward, we do need to replace our aging incinerator. We do have ongoing maintenance issues with it, and essentially the city doesn't really probably ultimately want to be in the incinerating business. So we'll learn more about that also going forward. We talked about the 12th and Commercial project for the intersection, and that's coming before us in this very meeting. So we'll hear lots of details from Tim Homan, our engineer and consultants. So that will be fascinating. And we talked briefly about the new raw water line and clear well projects. The new raw water line is up and running, and the Clearwell should be online in April. And the results of those projects are great. The Deception Pass fiber project has been moving at a glacial pace due to COVID delays. And the next thing that will happen with that is the fiber will be extended under the Deception Pass Bridge from Pass Lake in early March. And then lastly, we got a brief overview of 2021 water line replacements that are scheduled around the city, as well as street preservation projects. And that's the scoop from Public Works.
Thank you, Carolyn. What's going on? Any additions to, and the council have any additional comments tonight on this? Okay, we'll move on now to item 3, which is public comment. And if you're in the audience and you want to talk to the council about anything that's not on the agenda, this is your opportunity at this point to talk to us. Okay, I don't see any hands up, so we're going to go back into our meeting. And we'll now go to item 4, which is our consent agenda. Items 8, the minutes, approval of claims, a contract mod for the Shoreline Master Program, and a contract mod for the Grandview Cemetery phases 1. So it's items A through D. What is your pleasure, council?
Mayor Gear,
Mr. Miller.
I move to approve consent agenda items A through D.
All right.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Young. We have a motion by Mr. Miller, a second by Mr. Young to approve the consent agenda. Any questions or thoughts? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Now we're on to other business. This is item 5A. This is open for public comment. This is the Commercial Avenue Complete Streets Project, Phase 1, 11th Street to 13th Street, alternatives. This is a discussion with a possible action this evening. Mr. Buckermeyer and Mr. Holman, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to do nothing more than introduce Tim this evening. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Tim is a senior project engineer with our engineering division. He's been our city project manager on this project since it started. I'm going to let Tim introduce his team, but we can expect there's a lot of other folks here also I see some folks from WashDOT and some other members of the team that Tim's put together. So I guess at the end of the meeting, what we're looking for is a head nod from council on what they would like to see us move forward with, so we can keep the project on track. If not this evening, which would be great, but if not this evening, maybe in the very near future, we would like to see that. There's a spoiler alert there on the agenda bill that has a recommended motion, so you can see probably where staff would like this to go. But with that, I'm going to let Tim take it over.
Thanks, Fred. Mayor Gear and members of the council, members of the public, my name's Tim Holman. I'm the project manager for the Commercial Avenue Complete Streets Project Phase 1, which encompasses 11th Street to 13th Street, including the 12th and Commercial intersection. And I'm going to also be assisted by Brandon Gonzalez from Alta Planning and Design. He's the project manager for our consultant team. He's also got a couple of experts that are here with him, Andrew Ratling and Michelle Mock from Transportation Solutions, Inc. They're going to provide you with, if you have any questions on traffic data. Brandon's going to give you a rundown on our public open house and our project team recommendation, as well as the analysis that we did on the different alternatives that we had. But before I turn it over to him, I'm going to run you real quick through the project history to where we are today. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about the opportunities that the city has, why we're doing this project. And so we'll get to that. I'm going to share my screen here real quick. I can figure it out. And should be it. Can I get a thumbs up if you see my project history? Perfect. So this project's been going on for quite a while. I think it started maybe Mayor Gear, back when you started as mayor, you brought to Public Works some current concerns about Commercial Avenue and what we can do to improve that roadway. It started well before my involvement. In September of 15, we got a grant from WashDOT to put together a corridor plan, our South Commercial Corridor Plan. And we kind of worked on that through 15 and 16. We had an open house in 2016, January, where we talked about the different options, presented them to council. The council at that time, some of you folks, some of you weren't on, selected a preferred alternative for the kind of corridor, and we approved. That plan was approved in April 2016. That plan allowed us to pursue some grant opportunities. Actually, in the next year, in 2017, we were actually approached by the Bike and Ped group at WashDOT, and they were going around the state sharing some grant opportunities that they had upcoming. They wanted to specifically come to Anacortes because our incidence of bicycle and pedestrian collisions exceeds the state average. So they saw that there's the statistics show that there's a problem here in Anacortes, and they wanted to let us know that that was what they showed, that their statistics showed that they had some grant opportunities available. And when we showed them the South Commercial Plan, they said that's exactly what we want in that grant opportunity. So we applied for that grant in 2018. We're awarded it finally in 2019 June for $1.3 million. We were able to take that grant award from WashDOT and leverage it towards another grant from the Transportation Improvement Board of Washington State. They like to jump on board and help projects get done. They actually came up, we walked them down to the 12th and Commercial intersection. They took one look and said, this intersection needs some work, and we'd like to be a part of it. So they gave us some money for that. And so we immediately went back to Alta Planning and Design, who had done our South Commercial Corridor Plan, and engaged them in November 2019. We kicked off the project for the first phase from 11th to 13th. And that's when Brandon got on our team. And we went to work, put together four alternatives, and brought them forward to the first project open house that we had in December of 2019. I think most of you were on council at that time. Brandon gave us a great presentation. We had great participation from the public, lots of good input. As a result of that open house, we also made some connection with a bunch of surrounding business owners, commercial property owners. They were able to give their input as well. And out of those four opportunities, the cream kind of rose to the top for a more conventional style intersection and a roundabout. So we took those forward, as well as including a kind of a baseline of the intersection in its current format. And that's what we began to analyze. Our intent at that point was to bring that back to a second project open house in the spring of 2020. But we all know what happened in the spring of 2020. That's when COVID began to hit, and that limited public gatherings. So we put we continued to proceed with the planning level on the project, working with WashDOT, beginning some intersection control evaluation, did some further analysis, did some outreach websites on the city's website during the spring of 2020 during that COVID time. But it became apparent in the late summer that we weren't going to be able to have an open house in a conventional sense anytime soon. So we began to kind of go in a different direction. We came up with a concept that we'd seen around of virtual open house website. So we developed a website that would allow us to have a virtual public open house. We launched that in December of 2020 beginning, kept it live for a couple months. It's still live, but we wanted to kind of draw a line in the sand, assemble the input we got from that. And as Brandon will present that to you, but we had a great public input from that. I think we had well over 100, approaching 200 different comments that came in via that website. So once again, Anacortes showed their pride in their city and their interest in what we did. And that leads us to where we are tonight, where we're going to present you the results of that open house. And we're going to, like Fred said, ask you for selection of a preferred alternative. We're going to share our analysis with you and hope that you guys can give us a little direction moving forward. One more thing I wanted to do before I give it over to Brandon, I wanted to address the opportunities that the city has in this project. With a transportation project of this magnitude, there's never one problem you're trying to solve, never one goal you're trying to meet. There's always a lot of different opportunities, some competing, some that work together, but you want to look to try and realize as many of those as possible. So I put together a kind of quick list of what we've got. This project's going to allow us to kind of tie two projects together. I'm sure you're well aware the city a few years back paved 11th Street North through downtown, through the Central Business District, and that was a successful project. I think the following year, WashDOT came and they paved the SR20 spur to the west from this intersection out to the ferry. But as you can see, neither agency grabbed this intersection, and there's a reason for that. So we're looking to tie those together. The reason that neither of those projects encompass this intersection is, according to federal regulations, we've mentioned this, I think, to the council before, when you pave a roadway, you've got to bring the pedestrian facilities adjacent to that roadway up to current ADA standards. That's a federal requirement. If you don't meet that federal requirement, you open yourself up to many third-party lawsuits, as with any federal regulation. So that is a real challenge here at this intersection. If you can all visualize it, this intersection, I don't think any of the corners meet ADA currently. There's one whole leg that doesn't even have pedestrian facilities, and that's something that would have flown in the past. That's not something that you can get away with now. So as you look to do those pedestrian facilities here at a major intersection with a light, you're going to be beginning to impact the light function, the traffic signal timing, and that's going to begin to impact how the cars navigate the intersection. Another situation at this intersection is there's a lot of kind of wasted space. There's a lot of lanes that go through the intersection and then dump onto another street. There's a lot of lanes that cars never even really drive on. There's a lot of paved area that, as hatched off, that cars even aren't supposed to drive on. This intersection really can use a whole lot more organization. And so as you upgrade the pedestrian facilities, that impacts the light timing. You need to then look to how you can better organize the intersection, all of a sudden your intersection or your paving job has gone from a paving job to an intersection job. That's kind of where we stand now. Obviously, this is the intersection. Well, one leg is a city road. The other two legs of this T intersection is a state highway. But the city has the opportunity in taking the lead on this to kind of look at the context of this intersection. WashDOT's really good, and they're great partners at getting cars from one place to another. You want a highway built, a freeway built, they're the best in the world at doing it. When you begin to reach, well, they're great engineers and they could handle an urban intersection like this. They're not geared to look at the context of an intersection as much as we are here at the city. Here at the city, we're obviously navigating the intersection daily. We're in touch with the community. We know what the community's values are. We know have a context sensitivity for the intersection. And so it's just a great opportunity for WashDOT, or for us to take the lead on it, obviously with input from WashDOT as our partner. But I think we can better provide what the city wants out of this intersection when the city takes the lead. A couple things that we want to look at is we want to update the entrance to downtown. You know, downtown starts one block to the north of this intersection, and it's a little bit separated. The city's done a great job of creating a sense of place over the years up in downtown. You know, we've got nice wide sidewalks for pedestrians. We've got parking for cars. We've got cars able to get through. We've got room for bikes, and everyone kind of works well in a complete street. But we kind of lose that as we drop one block south to this intersection. So I think there's an opportunity to encourage more people to head downtown as we look to reorganize this intersection. Another opportunity is WashDOT is we can accelerate the time frame of getting this stretch of road paved as we look to do this intersection. WashDOT's facing their own challenges of budgetary, you know, from a budgetary standpoint, as everybody is. They're having to address some fish passage issues. They've got a lot of roads around the state that need resurfacing, and we can grab that and handle this couple blocks for them and accelerate that. Also, it allows us to implement the first step of that corridor plan that I talked about, that we first developed in 2015, 2016. And with that corridor plan, we've kind of been working on the Commercial Avenue corridor on a multifaceted way with different parts of WashDOT. We've been working with their maintenance department on getting some of the potholes filled, bigger bumps ground down. We have a meeting scheduled for a couple weeks from now to specifically talk to them about what we can get done with them in this next summer. We've also been working with their planning and their traffic group in the local Mount Baker region about a quick build of that corridor plan, a way we can implement that for the whole length of the corridor in a quick way that would allow us to do projects like this 11th through 13th project in pieces instead of ripping up the whole corridor all at once, which would be prohibitive from a cost standpoint. But there's nothing better than getting a chunk of it built. So if we can get a chunk of this corridor plan built, the first chunk, that's going to open up a whole lot of opportunities. The opportunities for grant money. We've already got some grant money that the plan allowed us to pursue. But once you actually turn some dirt and get a chunk of it down, then the grant agencies see that, and they can see what the vision is, see what the plan is, and they want to be part of making that happen. So, we already see that just getting one grant to get this project started, we got another grant agency on board in TIB, and that's only going to accelerate as we begin to build the corridor.
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Young.
Tim, just wanted to, just for the sake of clarity, to make sure I'm understanding. Part of this is that we've got an issue we have to address. That's the ADA compliance. Regardless of whatever we did, we still need to address that. And what we have now is some grant money that really can't be used for anything else other than to fix this issue. And we have an opportunity to use that money that can't be used anyplace else at this time to fix a problem that we will need to address anyway. And we've got a problem with the intersection that needs some revision. Is that correct?
That's correct, Anthony.
Okay.
We have a problem. It's going to have to be addressed. It's not going to be a cheap and easy problem to fix, but we have some grant money now that is designated for this. If we don't use this grant money here, then that grant money leaves Anacortes. It's not usable anywhere else in town. It's not usable on this corridor. It's going to go to some other city for a bike and pedestrian related improvement, and they're going to realize that opportunity instead of us.
And the thought for pushing this forward, particularly right now, is that this is really a rare opportunity, and the city and the team thought that it would be appropriate that if we do have access to these resources, we have a problem we need to address. Why not take full advantage of it by moving it up and then see what we can address and try to make it work for everyone? Not only cars, cars are the first priority, and people. And then, so we're not going to impede any of that. So this is just the first part of the whole phase of discussion. And I think you said early on, nothing is really off the table. What you really believe right now going forward is this is our best path. But as we get further down, if that is no longer the viable choice, we will make those decisions then.
Yeah.
Have I missed anything?
No, you got it exactly. We're asking tonight for a preferred alternative. We're gonna lay out a solution that we think is going to provide for cars, going to provide for pedestrian, going to provide for bikes, allow all users to improve the current situation at this intersection for everybody. And but we're going to ask for it to be a preferred alternative. We're going to take it into design. Anytime you go into design, you're going to run into hiccups and you're going to run into challenges. And so nothing is decided. This isn't a decision other than authorizing us to move forward into design. And we'll be revisiting back to you guys. And if we run into a hangup where our preferred alternative doesn't work, we'll be bringing it back with a why. And I'm going to let Brandon also speak to that.
So can I just say one thing before we move forward? I just
Sure.
want to remind the council that this, for me, it's our first real opportunity to start the implementation of the South Commercial Corridor Plan. And, we've been talking about this since 2014, 15 came a plan. So it's been a long time in the works. It's like a really exciting time for us because we can actually start to implement something that's important to all of us. And especially South Commercial, to have that pedestrian access, to have ADA, to have, I think we had treescapes and bike paths. We have all kinds of opportunities. So this is just the start of a much bigger picture. So I commend you, Tim, and the team, and I'll be quiet now. I'm just really excited. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Mayor Gear. That's exactly right. This is the first piece, and once you get the ball rolling, it's easier to keep it rolling. And the other thing is, you wouldn't think that a roadway can spur on adjacent improvements, but more and more often it shows that it can. If we're designing the roadway for a sense of place, it's going to encourage the development and redevelopment along the corridor to kind of follow along. So with that, I'm going to pass along to Brandon Gonzalez so he can present the results of our open house and our analysis. And if I can figure out how to stop sharing my screen, I'm going to let Brandon go. Thanks, Brandon.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. Let me start sharing my screen now. Make sure that everyone can see it. I guess I'll ask for the same thumbs up. Perfect. Thank you. I like that, Tim. That's a good idea, the thumbs up from the video to make sure. Well, Mayor Gear and Council, it's good to be back again. I share Mayor Gear's excitement. I know we've been waiting for about a year to kind of have this chance to come and evaluate the recommendations, evaluate a lot of the alternatives, and come back and tell you kind of what we've found so far and what our general recommendation is for continuing to move forward in the project. And so what I'm going to do tonight is in the presentation, I'm just going to give a little bit of a project overview. Tim did a great job of giving you a lot of the details of the project, so I'll just kind of hit it from a very high level, talk a little bit about some of the work that we've completed over the past year, what we've been up to. I'll take a little bit of time to walk through community feedback on a couple of the different ways that we've been conducting that community feedback and some of the themes and results of input there. I'll walk you through the 3 different alternatives that you've seen probably up on the website and get into some of the details between the 3. And then I'll just conclude with kind of our recommendation on kind of next steps and ways to keep moving forward. So let's start off with a little bit of a project overview. So one thing that you've probably noticed if you've gone to the website or you've seen the project name is that we're talking about the Commercial Avenue Complete Street. And just for public or anybody who might be joining, it's what is a complete street? And I mean, just to keep it pretty simple, but a complete street is really a roadway that works for everybody. And so whenever we're designing a complete street, you're thinking about like I said, space for people, and thinking about some of the ADA issues that Tim was talking about. We're trying to create that multimodal space for people who are biking. Obviously, cars is still a big consideration, and we're thinking about traffic and vehicle movements and safety between vehicles and users through the street. In transit, shared mobility, I feel like it's changing every couple of months. There's something new that technology is throwing our way with scooters and e-scooters and everything else, and you can see people going around riding at like a one-wheel kind of thing. So it's kind of crazy how things are changing. And then as part of all of this, we're addressing stormwater. We're creating that sense of place, trying to make the street look a little bit nicer and, like Tim said, fit into the surrounding context. And so really that's what a complete street is. And I think it's just important to start with that of, that's really our guiding, kind of our guidance for what we're trying to do with our design and with this project. And then as Tim mentioned, we weren't making all these decisions and kind of starting in a vacuum. This is just one segment from the 2016 plan. This was the preferred alternative that was approved at the time. Downtown Anacortes is directly to the left, and the street kind of in the middle is 12th. And so you can see that this was that conceptual alternative that was developed. These were not engineering documents. These were kind of a process of public input, of looking at the right-of-way, evaluating alternatives, thinking about traffic, and coming up with this concept that they knew would be eventually kind of vetted through some additional design, which is exactly what we're doing right now. But again, it's just important just to remember that we're really starting from this concept. And then, the image that we've seen a lot from that plan was just a perspective of Commercial Avenue. And you can see that really the main outcomes of the project where we have our vehicular lanes that are kind of nicely separated from pedestrian and bicycle facilities. So it just creates that really safe and comfortable experience for people who are walking and biking. And like Tim said, this is the first, 2 or 3 blocks of, what this corridor plan really looked at. And it really makes sense that we're starting kind of from the downtown area. We're extending that framework and that great space of downtown just a few additional blocks. And then there's other things that the city can think about for the future, like Tim mentioned, with quick build projects and other things that help to tie this, 2 or 3 block segment into the rest of the corridor. And then the city has flexibility to keep implementing pieces at a time in the future. So let me go through a little bit of some of the work that we've completed over the past months and a few months to give you an idea of what we've been up to. So I'll go through the details of the engagement themes later, but we started with the December 6th open house in 2019. It's kind of crazy after the past year of looking at a picture and seeing everybody inside in a crowd without masks, and just a reminder of how much life has changed over just the past year. We've been doing business outreach. We've had meetings with Safeway, and I know staff has had meetings with some of the other businesses that are around the corridor, and that will just be continuing and probably get even stronger over the next phase of the project. We've had a lot of one-on-one calls with residents and people who have called to ask questions and to talk about the project, which has been great. We launched an interactive web map to kind of get people's thoughts on some existing conditions and barriers and safety issues. And that was done, I think in March or so of last year. And we pulled that and integrated it into the virtual open house. And then obviously the virtual open house has been our more recent thing that we've tackled. We weren't able to do any in-person events for obvious reasons. And so we did a second best, which was to get a lot of information on the virtual open house and get an opportunity to get feedback, which has been pretty great. In addition to that public engagement, what we've been doing is working on and vetting a number of different alternatives. And so the concepts and things that you see on the website, and I think it's also really important for the public to really understand, is that these are concepts. These are, again, not quite engineering details. These are ideas, and these are things that we're thinking about so that we can actually go through and conduct the analysis on traffic, on impacts to safety, on impacts to congestion. And so over the past year or so, we've developed a number of different concepts that we then allowed our sub-consultant TSI did a lot of great analysis on that I'll speak to in a second. And the whole purpose of creating these concepts is really to start thinking about pros and cons and impacts. So they are at a higher level, but they're in enough detail that allows us to kind of dig into some of the analysis and figure out what their impacts might be. And so then, as I mentioned, over the past, or I guess in mid part of 2020, TSI conducted a traffic impact analysis, or a TIA, that evaluated the 3 scenarios that I'll walk through in just a second. And just to again make it super clear on that a TIA really gets into a lot of the details of what the design's impacts on traffic, congestion, queuing, safety, freight traffic. There was a lot of different things that we looked at when we conducted the TIA. And then also more recently, in the second half of 2020, we submitted an intersection control evaluation, or an ICE, to WashDOT. And that allows them to see kind of where we're at, what are some of the concepts that we're evaluating, and give them the opportunity to weigh in on whether or not, if we went with a roundabout, or if we were to change the intersection control. It gives them the ability to kind of give us a check on that and let us know what their thoughts are and whether or not they would allow it. So we're in the final stages of that process with WashDOT. So now moving on into community feedback. So kind of what we've heard from the public so far. I had to throw this slide in just because, so I've worked on a lot of projects over the past 14 years, and this is the first time that we actually used some of the Public Works signage to advertise for a public meeting. And so kudos to Public Works for getting all of that out there, in addition to social media and other things. And I think we also used it whenever we launched the virtual open house. So kind of a neat way to catch people's attention in a busy intersection. So on December 6th, 2019, we had the open house. Some of the main themes that we heard from the open house were really traffic implications. I think that was probably the #1 biggest thing that we took away from the public, was what is going to happen to the intersection regardless of any change we make on congestion and on traffic. Trucking routes and trucking traffic was another really big topic that came up, and not really specific to the project, but there was a lot of people talking about just a holistic kind of approach to truck routes in the city and trying to get trucks a little bit away from the downtown core in these areas. The Safeway entrance was a pretty hot topic also, kind of thinking about, should we close it? Should we keep it open? And if you remember at that meeting, we actually had a concept or a design that showed the Safeway entrance being closed, just to start to get feedback from the public. And like I said, it was a lot of people were really talking about the history of that and kind of their feelings on the Safeway entrance. Roundabout, as you can imagine, it's kind of one of those polarizing issues. We don't have a lot of people that are just kind of meh on roundabouts. You have people that are very, very for them and they believe in them, and you have people that are very, very against them. And so I think the theme from our first meeting was just pretty consistent there, which was a lot of people very for it and a lot of people very against it. Safety obviously was a concern. I mean, it's one of the major pieces of this project. And then it is still part of, or it is within our project area, but the 11th and Commercial intersection, we heard a lot from people about this intersection from both as you're driving through it and also trying to cross there. So it would be something that we'd be thinking a little bit more about during design of, you know, do we need to do a four-way stop, or is there something else that we need to do at that intersection? So then the web map, like I said, it was launched for a couple of months and then integrated into our virtual open house. And a couple of the main themes that, by the way, anybody can go look at these comments. If you go to the virtual open house, click on show comments, and you can see these. But just summarizing some of the main themes, a lot of safety concerns for people crossing 11th or 12th and Commercial. And most people were using other blocks to make that crossing and to get over to the Tommy Thompson Trail. Again, the 11th and Commercial intersection, there's a lot of comments on this that intersection. If you go to the web map, a lot of people really talking again about the unsafe crossing or feeling of being unsafe as they cross through there or even driving through there. It's not in our project area, but there was a lot of comments over on Avenue Q kind of highlighting, all right, so if we get people across Commercial, the next step is getting them over across Q to the Tommy Thompson Trail. And then just generally with traffic speeds and traffic volumes of just trying to do some traffic calming and feeling like we need to slow things down just a little bit through here. So now onto the virtual open house. So we've had really good feedback here, well over, I think 150 so far people that have responded, which is good. And just for full transparency and how we kind of created this graphic, the information on the web, or the way that people can interact with us on the website is sending us a comment. And something just to, I think it's something you should be proud of is I've worked again on a lot of projects over the past 14 years. And I think that this has probably been the project that's got the most kind of, I don't know if intellectual is the right word, but just very technical comments. A lot of people are really weighing in from a very like technical perspective, which I think is pretty neat. And so we took their comments and we tried to like pull some of the key themes and some of the key words from their comments so that we could kind of figure out what are some of the main themes that people are telling us. And so traffic congestion obviously was the biggest. So 31 of our comments had something specific on concerns over traffic congestion. Truck movements was also pretty big. And they were specifically talking about freight trucks moving through the intersection, head safety, roundabout confusion. So there was a few comments basically on, well, we don't know really, you know, the rules around using a roundabout are being learned by others, and you know, some confusion about that. Safeway entrance, again, a big one that came up. Cost was also, came up quite a bit from a few different people, and the cost from the comments was really around, you know, why should we be spending money on this particular project when there's other things that we could be essentially spending the money on? And Tim kind of talked through that a little bit with the grant funding. Traffic mitigation and safety were both opportunities. So those were on the positive, that people really responded that this project was an opportunity to improve traffic and also to focus on safety. And then the drum roll for kind of the public thoughts on the three alternatives is it was 50-50 split, which is pretty fascinating. So about 50% said do nothing, leave it alone. And about the other 50% wanted to do something. And of the people who wanted to do something, it was overwhelming for the roundabout option. So wish we could give you some better direction on which of the two, but it was a 50-50 split. All right, so now let me get into the actual alternatives analysis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through the three different alternatives, and you'll see over here on the left that there's performance measures. So these are essentially the functions that we were evaluating the three different alternatives for. And if you see a red, that generally indicates that there is a decrease in performance. If there's a green, then that's an increase in performance. And then if there's nothing, then it's a neutral. So with a no change scenario, we're basically assuming that the intersection is going to stay exactly like it is today. There's not going to be any changes or improvements. So if you're thinking about it from if we're not doing anything, then how do things get worse? And the reality is that all of our analysis was run on projected 2040 volume. So we're thinking about the next 20 years. So traffic, the community is growing. There are more people driving through. There's, we know going to be increases of traffic along the corridor. So even if we decide we don't want to do anything at all, safety will likely continue to decrease because you will have more of that congestion at the intersection. From a traffic flow, the biggest impact is really the left turn. If you're driving northbound, turning left onto 12th Avenue, 12th Street, that's the one that's going to probably have the greatest decrease. Not necessarily a change in vehicle capacity, because the capacity is what it is. We're not changing anything. The vehicle queuing would decrease, and the queuing is basically, just for those that may not be familiar with the term, is think about how many cars are kind of lined backwards waiting to get through that intersection. And so with increased traffic, there would still be a decrease in, or an increase in the vehicle queue, which is actually a decrease in performance. Freight, again, without changes, there wouldn't be any negative changes there, other than, again, dealing with some of the traffic implications. In cost, obviously a low cost, because we're not really proposing doing anything. So then we're going to scenario 2, which is the signalized intersection and roadway narrowing. So with this particular concept, you can see now we're starting to get into that the approved alternative that we saw that came out of the 2016 plan. So we have the separated bike ped facilities. We have a few lane reductions near the Safeway entrance. And with those improvements, we see that there is an increased actually safety for people biking and walking, but it is an increased risk of rear-end crashes based on the analysis that was done because of keeping the traditional intersection and also increasing kind of the congestion and the number of vehicles. Traffic flow, we'll think about level of service. Not necessarily a significant impact for people driving through the intersection continuing into downtown, but there would be, I think it was significant reductions in the the northbound left turn going onto 12th Street. The vehicle queuing, the same thing, is that northbound left turn would have the most significant impact, so a decreasing function there. Not a significant impact on freight. And then the cost we put as median for this one, because there's obviously improvements that are going in, but they're not necessarily as high as the third option might be. So then moving into the third option, which is our third scenario, which is the roundabout. So you can see here again, we started with the 2016 plan and the concept of showing the separated bike ped facilities, and then we inserted a roundabout at the location. So with the roundabout option, we do have improved safety for all modes and users. We know that roundabouts generally reduce traffic collisions, and so that, from a vehicle perspective, we would see a decreased likelihood of a decreased number of vehicle incidents. But we also have improved safety for people biking and walking. A lot of it has to do with, we're creating those widened sidewalks, we're adding separated bike and ped facilities, and then we're also, really importantly, slowing traffic speeds through here. Traffic flow, again, we know that because of the continuous flow or continuous movement of vehicles through a roundabout, traffic flow generally increases at these when one is installed. And at this particular location, given the importance of traffic mitigation and congestion, I think that's an important consideration to also think about. Vehicle capacity is also increased, again, due to the continuous movement of vehicles through the roundabout itself. And then the same thing with vehicle queuing. That continuous movement really does have a lot of positive impacts on traffic flow, and the vehicle queuing is no exception. And then for freight traffic in particular, the ultimate roundabout that would be designed would be designed specifically to accommodate freight traffic. So that's something that we can just to clarify there. And the biggest downside with the roundabout option is, again, cost. We would be having some pretty significant changes in construction at the intersection, which does raise the cost of it. But again, we're thinking about that 20-year timeline, and there appears to be, at least from the traffic analysis and other things, a lot of benefits from a traffic perspective for the roundabout, and also some tangential benefits for bike and ped users, which is one of the main priorities of the project and grant funding. So just to give you a little bit of an overview without going into the details of all three, but you can see where those sort of stack up between the three different scenarios that we were looking at for the traffic impact analysis. And there are clearly a lot of benefits that the roundabout option provides for the intersection. That's not to say that there aren't certain challenges that still have to be dealt with the roundabout, and not trying to make the picture seem overly rosy. There's definitely some challenges and some design themes and things that we need to think about with the roundabout. But if we're thinking predominantly from a traffic perspective and a traffic flow, the research and the TIA shows that we would expect to have improvements for traffic flow, congestion level of service. And then a lot of those also help to create a safer experience for people biking and walking.
Brandon, Mayor
Yes,
Gay,
sir.
can I ask a question of Brandon, just a quick one?
Yes, go ahead.
Just from the modeling standpoint, does the model incorporate into its algorithm or analysis the increased traffic that may increase people traffic that may be traveling to the San Juan Islands using the ferry system? You know, it is a hot destination, and I think we were up to 2 million people. So if that trend continues, that means that it's going to be a lot more traffic taking this route to go to the San Juan Islands for whatever reason.
So good question. So for the modeling, we did incorporate basically queue considerations. So it would be, or basically be, whenever the traffic is leaving the ferry, there's obviously certain trends that come with a lot of vehicles leaving the ferry at once and going through the intersection. So we did look at some of those, but Andrew, I think, would best be able to speak to, you know, if they looked at kind of the future traffic as part of those 24 projections and what that looks like to San Juan, if you're able to take that one.
Sure. Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, so the traffic forecasts were based on the city's travel demand model, which is based on the comp plan, land use forecast, and external growth forecasts. So those also incorporate regional growth associated with, for example, ferry demand increasing, kind of recreational demand increasing. And then as part of the delay and queuing analysis, when we get into the fine-grained detail, we also looked at I guess the peakiness, or kind of those demand surges associated with ferry ingress and egress. So that's where you see, if you look at I won't go into the details of the traffic reports, but there's discussion in there of this concept of 95th percentile queuing. And so that's kind of the queue that is exceeded during no more than 5% of a peak hour. That's kind of where it gets into that ferry demand surge.
Right, good. That answers my question, because that would be my concern, because I think if we'd made projections based upon our growth, our use, but, you know, we also have this auxiliary growth, this auxiliary use of people using this system that we have that, you know, we want to keep, of course, the ferry, but, you know, it's been lots of growth. And so I just wanted to make sure that was anticipated in these projections, such that when we look at these three options, we really are getting a modeling that projects into the future what we fully anticipate may happen. Thank you. You answered my question.
Great. Good point. Very good point.
Mayor Gear?
Yes, go ahead.
Since the question's around modeling, I'm not trying to open a can of worms yet. It's just about modeling. Did any of the models, scenario 2 and 3, include taking out the Safeway entrance? Because that would obviously lead to traffic flow changes and vehicle capacity. Were any models used for that?
These assumed that the Safeway entrance would remain as it is.
Okay, thank you.
Right. So getting to the final piece, which is recommendation and kind of the next steps of the project, what we're looking at doing. So based on, you know, a lot of based on public feedback, discussions, looking at the evaluation that we've been doing on a number of different concepts, thinking about one of the, you know, obviously the core of the project, because of grant funding and other things, is really on improving, you know, bike ped conditions through the area, but also knowing that as part of improving bike ped facilities, this is a major intersection for the community, a very busy intersection for the community. And so we also have to really be taking congestion and traffic impacts very seriously. And so based on a lot of the analysis that we've completed, we believe that we recommend moving forward with the roundabout design as our preferred alternative. And what that essentially means for us as kind of the project team is kind of like Tim alluded to. We're ready. The past year, we've been looking at the high level conceptual design. We've been doing a lot of the analysis. but we really now have to start diving into the details because there's going to be a lot of questions that come up as we get into the engineering details. And so there's a lot of things that we still need to answer and a lot of great, conversations that still need to happen with the public and with you, with council. But what the recommendation does is it gives us the ability to continue moving forward into that next phase of the engineering design. And so the overall kind of next steps, and this is kind of contingent on when we get to that next step and a lot of other things, but generally what we were looking to do is to begin preliminary design in next month. And then at that point, we're kind of going through a lot of those details and figuring out what this actually looks like. Probably by May or June is when we would have a pretty good idea of kind of what that design and what that the engineering design looks like when we're getting to that 30% to 60% level. And then we finalize that concept, or not the concept, but we finalize the PSE package later this year with the final engineering design and construction documents. And we had a little bit of an ambitious goal that we're trying to at least target, which would be to try to go to bid later this year, that November timeline. And the really good thing about if we were to make that happen is we'd be really competitive with trying to get bids for the project. So there's the advantage of the city to get lower price for that contract. So
Mayor
with
Geer?
that,
Yes, go ahead, Carolyn.
Thank you. I have a question about our grant funding. What do we know? Is there a deadline for when that needs to be used?
I'll take that. Yeah. So Carolyn, in preparation for this, I was actually just looking at the grant funding for both those grants, and although it feels like this project's been delayed by COVID and our lack of public meetings, actually we're right on target. We told both the grant agencies that we'd be looking to construct this project in the spring of 2020 or 2022. So this timeline hits right what we had committed. If we had not lost the multiple months over the last year, we probably could have exceeded that. And grant agencies love it when you can spend the money sooner. They like to see their money spent, funny people. But we're right on target for what we promised them.
Great, thank you.
all right, well, that concludes my presentation. I think we'll turn it back over to you all for questions. And you met Andrew already. He can jump in on a lot of the modeling and traffic analysis questions. And we also have Michelle, one of his colleagues here, to help with any questions also.
Okay, thank you, Brandon. Council.
Yeah, Mayor Geer.
Christine McGrath.
Yeah, thank you. Kind of going off what Mr. Miller brought up, because I think that when that 2019 meeting open house happened, one of those discussion points was approaching Safeway about closing that entrance and whether or not that was a viable option. So I was just kind of curious about your thoughts on that, or if you've talked to them. My big concern is that I want this intersection at 12th and Commercial to flow seamlessly with 11th and Commercial, and then also 11th and Q, because we see a lot of pedestrian traffic on those two intersections, and I think they all kind of work together, and we need to have somewhat of a rough master plan. And that doesn't mean that the roundabout doesn't make the most sense, but if you could just kind of speak to whether or not there are some options when it comes to Safeway's kind of master plan with entrance and exits, because it seems like that's a kind of a bottleneck there for pedestrian traffic trying to just get from their car into Safeway.
Sure. Do you want me to take that, Tim, or do you want to take that?
I'll give it a first shot, and then you can fill in for me, Brandon, like you always do. So Christine and council, yeah, we did take the 4 initial kind of concepts that we had at the first open house, following them. Safeway was our next call. We met with them, we met with the store manager, and first off, and showed him all 4 concepts. We held the roundabout back to last. So we showed him the closing down his his entrance first, or Safeway's entrance first, and we met a pretty strong resistance to that. We brought up the option of redevelopment of their site as a potential, centering around modification of their accesses. He was pretty excited about that. But I must confess, when we showed him the roundabout at the end, and this was actually a pretty similar result to what the design team, we didn't start, as you can see, the concepts that Brandon showed you. A roundabout wasn't our initial consideration at this intersection. And when we showed it to Safeway, and also the first time the design team saw it, it was almost a revelation that the roundabout begins to solve a lot of the problems, even on site with the Safeway parking lot. And so the fact that when we showed the store manager that, he saw that almost instantly and jumped all over that. So he really embraced the roundabout, pushed back pretty hard on the closing Safeway. He then routed us to their Seattle kind of regional office headquarters, and if anything, they were more resistant. There was probably general resistance all around to the whole project. They saw the roundabout, conceded it could help them, but they were cautiously optimistic. But they pushed back even harder on closing the option. We did bring up to them once again the redevelopment, and they showed zero interest in a massive site redevelopment of their access. So that's kind of why the design team moved forward with the roundabout. We think we can solve that Safeway problem without shutting them down. Obviously, you know, if the design team received direction from policy makers, we can go any direction that you folks would like. Did I hit on everything, Brandon?
Yeah, I think you covered it, Tim.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Miller and then Mr. Young.
So again, back to the Safeway topic, I feel like there's just maybe a little bit left on the table by just saying redevelopment. To me, did you present a plan where obviously if we do this, we're moving their entrance, we're redeveloping your parking lot? Tim, help me out there. Because if you just say you're closing their entrance, of course they're going to be resistant to it, and your only option is a roundabout. Sure, that's going to work for them, but I'm a little unclear on what the, you know, what you sold them on.
Sure.
For.
That's well said. So both the closing down their access and even the roundabout are going to require some modifications to their parking lot. And we spoke to them about that. We spoke to them about how the city have affecting their access point and impacting their parking lot would be something that would have to be addressed in the project. So we did speak to them about that. Actually, when I was talking about redevelopment, we kind of went a step further and said, hey, if we're going to be redoing the whole street, trying to create that sense of place, and if you guys want to jump on board with a whole new redeveloping your site from a building standpoint and building a more urban type Safeway with you know, and less of a suburban style like it is now, and they weren't interested in that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to look at it from a business owner's perspective of having construction's always challenging, but if you don't present them with a nice picture that shows them with a new entrance that's, you know, halfway between 12th and 11th, and you know they're going to be resistant anyway because it's a construction project. But without that, you know, of course they're going to say, yeah, we don't want you to close that entrance. That's my concern. And then my other concern, as I mentioned before, not modeling that being closed kind of limits pushing that discussion at all. So I mean, essentially, I think if we give you the nod to move forward, that's not even going to be on the plate. So a little bit concerned there. And then one more comment about the funding, really just to hopefully maybe for the council, my education, because I know you briefly flashed up there, the TIB, it's 1.3 million. Is that correct on the?
Yeah, so it was 1.3 million from WashDOT Bike and Ped, and
Go ahead.
950,000 from TIB for a total of 2.25 million.
Okay, so it's I had it backwards. I thought it was 1.3 from TIB, because my concern is when you get the grants, it kind of leads it a certain way. And obviously the council has expressed concerns, the public has expressed concerns about traffic flow being obviously critical, of course, pedestrian safety. And then I don't know if I have a question here, but the one last piece, I know every intersection by RCW, whether it's marked or not, is treated as a pedestrian way. But is there some ways that you could eliminate a crosswalk, eliminate a pedestrian? Is there a way to do that, I guess?
So from a peer standpoint, yes, there is. When we were working with WashDOT, when they were doing the 12th Street, the 12th Street overlay project and doing the ADA along that roadway, they were obviously upgrading all the ADAs they're required to do, and they take a very strict ruling, like you said, on the RCW, that every intersection is a crosswalk. When we got to the O Avenue and 12th, where there hasn't ever been a pedestrian crossing, we kind of had a long discussion with WashDOT about, hey, the city doesn't see that as a safe intersection that close to 12th and Commercial with the problems that it has, and hey, can we avoid that? And WashDOT took that down to headquarters. That sort of decision is not something that's made even at a local region level. It's something that has to go to headquarters. And they, even with the city's very strong support, headquarters came back with a no way, that even at that more minor intersection, not having all four legs be crosswalks was a non-starter. So I think we'd be fighting a very similar problem at this intersection.
I can't imagine there aren't some other unique examples where it just makes sense to not have pedestrians cross at certain four-way intersections. But I understand the RCW. I understand it. Thank you for the great answers.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Young.
Just to sort of follow up on Mr. Miller's lead in on that, I'm concerned as well. I think, though, that as a council, part of our first priority is to make sure that the issue that we are trying to address is traffic flow, the intersection as a whole, that we not rule out possibilities that we may decide is not in our best interest. For example, closing off that entrance. I think that if we're really going to take an honest assessment of the impacts, both good and bad, the people that are impacted, I think that still has to be on the table, because the underlying issue that we are addressing is that traffic flow and the pedestrian impact that we're having. So I'm not so sure that we should take it off the table. I do agree. I shop at Safeway too. I love what they do. And as a business owner, if I were Safeway, I would definitely not want that to happen, because it's in my best interest to have this easy flow in and out for the people that want to come and shop with me. And so I get their side of it. But again, I'm pointing back to our responsibility to the city as a whole. And in addressing this issue, we can create another way for Safeway's impact to be just as good. I mean, it really entering there or entering on 11th or entering on 13th. I mean, those are parts of the design that we can deal with once we determine what's actually going to work for us. I just don't want us to rule that out because they pushback. I think pushback is part of the natural process of bringing anything forward by anyone. So I want to make sure that we don't do that.
Get the lights back there when you're done? Thank you.
And so anyway, so what I'm saying is, I think that that's what we should do. I'm publicly I like Safeway. I want to be clear about that, but I think that as a city, we should not rule that out. And the reason why is if we're really going to address traffic flow to downtown, traffic flow up 12th, traffic flow on commercial, pedestrian, whether it's on one side, the other, or all of them, I just think if we rule that out, I'm not so sure that we will truly address the issue in a way that can lead us forward as a city. And so I want to make sure that we not do that. That's mainly the crust of my, my opinion, but I just think that it's natural for Safeway to push back. They've got a wonderful entrance. Yes, it can be a bit of a drag, people wanting to get out easy at the door. I totally get that. But access to Safeway for their customers, may be absolutely increased by flow if we consider all the options. So I just want to make sure we don't do that in this scenario. Thank you.
So Tim, if we did look at that, I guess for me then, if we took that as an option to look at, would the report cover where the other impacts would be? Because if you change the traffic flow, then you're looking at impacts on 11. You're looking at impacts on Q. I think we're just moving the problem or the congestion. So that's just how my brain works. So just a question, would you analyze it if we went down that path or?
I think that's well said, Mayor Gear. I think we would have to analyze that. I think it's one of two, supermarkets in town. So the traffic to Safeway is not going away. So I think we're going to, if we analyze closing that intersection down, it's not as simple as close it down and we free everything up. I think we would have to do some serious analysis on both the 11th and Commercial intersection, as well as Q Avenue and the impacts to that truck route with the potential of more turning traffic into a tighter entrance off of that roadway as well. So I think kind of gut feeling is you're going to see that same impact shifted to other places. And I don't know if that's where we want to shift it or not, especially over onto a truck route. I mean, that's some analysis that we can do if that's what council would like us to do. And we have the means to do that. That's what TSI does.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Miller.
Yeah, since the staff is asking us for support of scenario 1, 2, and 3, and again, the challenge is, of course, scenario 2 and scenario 3 without having modeling done with that intersection closed or some potential future intersection. It's kind of hard to have all the pieces in place, because we've essentially set it up, and that's fine that staff has set it up that scenario 3 makes the most sense. It has all the green rather than the red. But the reality is we don't have the modeling data for what we all think should be something that could be considered. I could go ahead and say, hey, scenario 3 is the way to go. And Tim and the team tell us that, okay, we're going to look at possible impacts of traffic flow if we moved, if we cut a new entrance into Safeway. That would be fine too, if that helps. Obviously, I want to move this forward.
Mr. Walters.
Couple of questions. Are we going to get 11th Street west of Commercial, between Commercial and O, paved as part of this project? I know it was slated for an overlay a couple of years ago, and then that didn't happen. It's kind of like a roller coaster through there. I don't know if it fits into this project or not, but do we know anything about when that's going to happen?
I think Eric Sharbick, the city engineer, spoke to me about that just recently. I think he'd like to see that 11th Street both ways, between both Q and Commercial and Commercial and O, receive an overlay as well as a subgrade treatment. And I think tacking it onto this project, that probably would include some city overlay funds to do that, but we can get creative with how you mix and match. And sometimes grant agencies like to see that sort of thing as a match for their funds. So I think that's something that we're looking at for this project.
Yeah, so since we have a need to fix that intersection, it's right adjacent, or fix the street, it's right adjacent to the intersection that we're working on. I would like to see that as part of this project, save some of the mobilization costs and get it done, because we had told people that we were going to do it a couple of years ago, and people don't like it when we move the ball that way. Also, what do we think the impacts are going to be on the businesses on the other two corners at 12th and Commercial, especially Whidbey Coffee of a roundabout at that intersection? It looks to me like some of the slides, we're going to have to acquire some right of way. Maybe it might affect the Whidbey drive-through. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so I think, like Brandon said, these are preliminary schematics, but I think the belief was with the improvement, the intersection improvements that can be done that enhance the Safeway project, our parking lot. I think the intent was to try to shift whatever intersections we do that way to the east, thereby helping with the Safeway access, and both corners to the west, both on the north and the south, have buildings fairly tight in them. So any right-of-way acquisitions in those areas would be of greater impact. So I think our schematics have shown that. That's something that obviously we're going to dive quite a bit deeper into when we do design, is how to what extent any intersection improvement impacts a right-of-way acquisition.
So was it somebody else?
Go ahead, Tim. No, I was gonna see if I could add one last thing to Tim's comment about the roundabout. So the thing too is that the schematic that we used currently, just to sort of evaluate the option, has already been looked at from, kind of the radius and also kind of the turning traffics of trucks. And so we have submitted for part of ICE review kind of this minimal roundabout, small kind of a tight roundabout that actually works, at least from that kind of high level perspective. There's a lot of things we have to look at. So from that point, we're able to kind of, in the next phase of design, think about how much bigger it can get, and it almost becomes a little bit of a puzzle, kind of working it into that intersection and figuring out where is the best location for it to go. And like Tim said, we're thinking even just some small slight shifts in where we put that center of that intersection can make a big difference in kind of where that right-of-way acquisition, needs to happen. So anyway, I just wanted to just state that one little piece.
So the other thing that I wanted to say about this whole topic is that I do agree with a couple of my colleagues that we shouldn't take off the table the idea of changing some of the access to Safeway. And I understand that some of that is maybe baked into the cake anyway. For instance, the access towards 13th Street off of Commercial that in my judgment seems to go the wrong way already. However, it's also not obvious to me that closing the access at 12th and Commercial to Safeway would improve things. I just advocate for that analysis to be done. I'm especially worried about what goes on inside the Safeway parking lot, where, a car pulls up in front of Safeway, somebody gets out, goes to get milk, meets 10 or 15 of their best friends, chats, and a car is sitting there with its flashers on for half an hour, plus all the traffic in front of Safeway is slowing down, looking for pedestrians, kids running two directions. And there's a lot of stacking that then occurs inside the Safeway parking lot. Right now, they might have a chance to clear that before the light changes. But if there is no light and there's a roundabout, are we going to have a constant stream of cars heading into the Safeway parking lot, getting stuck, and then binding up the whole roundabout? I don't know. I just want to know that we've looked at that and modeled it. And so we don't have to just hope it all works out, but that we have some information that leads us to believe that it will be fine. And if it isn't, then we ought to look at some additional changes, like on the order closing the entrance but not the exit, or something like that. How much time is required to get that answer before we choose a preferred alternative? Or do we need to choose a preferred alternative now to go forward to get answers to some of those modeling questions?
I think to answer your question on the input from a roundabout and where impacts would be, I think that's one of the things that we were planning to move forward on in design. You know, as the size, that's going to be impacted by the size of the roundabout, how we modified the parking lot at Safeway, you know, lane sizes, things like that are going to be, that's all design level stuff. I think to speak to your thought about the queue that forms at Safeway right now from the light, I think we all struggle when looking at a lighted intersection. We begin to think of the traffic as always happening in that way. Lights tend to, you know, we talk about things like queue with lights. Brandon said that word a whole bunch. We do that because a light holds traffic and then sends a whole bunch of it through. Roundabouts don't function like that. We still talk about queue because that's how traffic engineers have been doing it for a long time. But really, the queuing at a roundabout is much different. So the constant flow of a roundabout is not flushing multiple cars at a time through. So I think there's ways to address that queuing coming out of the roundabout in the design level. So that kind of addresses the exiting the roundabout.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Miller.
And I want to get, Mr. Walters was trying to figure out a way to move it forward, and I want to get there too. But the problem is that when you don't model the closed, in scenario 2, I think there would be a lot more green lights on that chart if you modeled scenario 2 with a different intersection, with a different entry to Safeway. Is that a safe hypothesis, or you genius traffic engineers are going to tell me there's no chance that would happen? One of them was traffic flow going red, but if you closed one of the inputs into the
it's a fair question. Yeah, I mean, okay. Because you would redistribute kind of the signal phasing, and
yeah, I think a couple of those would go green.
There's not a high volume coming out of that Safeway, relatively speaking, so it's not getting a ton of green time as it is. But when you're kind of on the cusp of that, you know, failing or not curve, getting a little bit more green time can be helpful.
Mayor, Council, if I might chip in here. I think we were unwilling to, I guess, model or propose that for a couple of reasons. You know, obviously Safeway guy didn't like it, but we weren't sure that the public was going to receive it very well. So I think if we're going to go forward with, you know, taking a look at a closed or a relocated or a modified entrance, we need to do some modeling work, some design work, put together some new concepts, and go back out to the public and see what they think. You know, get their input. There might be a lot more green spaces on that, but there could be a few red ones as far as public reaction.
Mr. Buckemeyer, did the public comment on that during our hearings? Did that come up with the public at all?
And I'm going to let Brandon's team answer what some of the public comments were. But
yep, it did, Mayor Gear. There was at the first meeting that we had, that was one of the kind of themes that we heard, was just kind of questions about closing the Safeway intersection. And then in public, during the virtual open house, it was one of the higher kind of common themes that we were hearing from people was what about closing that?
So you didn't change your mind about presenting that just because Safeway didn't like it. You did it for a lot of reasons, correct?
Yes, ma'am. There was a lot of different reasons when we're thinking about kind of the traffic movements, when we're thinking about, even if we were to close that intersection, then like Tim was saying, it really is redistributing the traffic to another location. And then if we think about 11th, we did have a lot of conversations about this, and let's just say that we were to close and it moves over to 11th and Commercial, then there's going to have to be some modification or something that would need to happen at 11th and Commercial to move that traffic, or like we mentioned on the truck route over on Q, and kind of people moving around. So there would be implications, and so we were thinking about it as almost like a moot point from a traffic perspective of there would be a next whack-a-mole kind of problem that we would need to look at and solve.
Right. Because I keep thinking, wow, that would put it at the entrance of our central business district, right at 11th Street. I have a hard time getting across that intersection now in the evening. So I'm just thinking out loud.
Mayor
Yes,
Gear?
yes, Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. I tend to agree with the thought, with the fact that there will be cascading effects that are hard to anticipate, but some of them are not if we close that entrance. I mean, to think of 11th and Commercial, what it's like right now is already a little bit hazardous in its own right. Also, again, 11th and Q, 13th and Commercial. I think it is going to, like Brandon said, would be sort of a whack-a-mole situation, and for people to be able to adapt to that, it just seems like a whole lot to take on. I'm not really in favor of closing that entrance to Safeway.
Mr. Walters?
I concur with that sentiment generally. I just think that it should be studied. Study how the roundabout works inside the Safeway parking lot without doing a complete design of the entire roundabout, spending all the money to do that. Because if it doesn't work inside the Safeway parking lot, then we need to step back and do something else. So can we do that? Can we do that modeling? I'm assuming there's models that can be run. Can we do that modeling before really committing to the roundabout design and committing to not pursuing any kind of more substantial closures or those kinds of things of the Safeway parking lot?
Could I chime in and have Andrew potentially weigh in on that, just because I think that those considerations were made as part of the roundabout, but just curious if you could maybe chat a little bit about that, Andrew.
So to kind of speak to the issue of on-site queuing at Safeway, we could do that. It's not a traditional kind of traffic analysis model, but we do have queuing models with random arrival distributions that we could calculate the probability of a queue, for example, exceeding a certain length based on certain inputs. It wasn't explicitly considered in this analysis, but it could contribute to having some peace of mind that this is a feasible concept.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that could be paired, like if you do find a problem through that, if it could be paired with something short of closing the entrance, like some change to the striping in the parking lot, that's the direction of flow down one of the aisles or something.
I think that's the direction I would go with it is, if there is some circulation problem internal to that site, we would hope that that could be dealt with on the site, whether through restriping, rechannelization, or something else that could still allow the public infrastructure to work the way it should.
Mayor
Mr. Young, then Mr. Miller.
I totally agree with the approach, and I understand why we are, don't want to necessarily consider it, because we're going to be opening up an additional can of worms. But, the truth is we are already having an issue at 11th and 13th already. Safeway is one of the highest performing Safeways, I think, in the state, if I'm correct. And also there are 4 entrances already to it. So I just think that if we took that off the table, I like the roundabout, quite honestly, I do. But, since we already have an issue, already have 2 intersections or 3 intersections we're going to be addressing in some fashion, why not just go ahead and take a look? You know, and it doesn't need to be an exhaustive look, but it just needs to be under that consideration. I just think would be a disservice to not do a little bit of analysis after it, because quite honestly, I'm not convinced, even though I think this has been an absolutely stellar presentation by not only our team and the experts that are here. I really do. My question is, though, if we're already having a problem with stoppage in front of Safeway, the issue is that whether or not it's a traffic light or not, there's a lot of people going into Safeway because they're incredibly busy. So whether that's in a roundabout or not, you know, maybe if we were to divert that someplace else or have another interest, it would be something we can consider. And so forgive me for the phone ringing, but that's how life is. All right. Thank you.
Miller.
Yeah, I just, again, I think saying closing the entrance generates a lot more excitement than it should. And we keep talking about 11th, and I appreciate the comments made, but 11th and a half, or like Mr. Walters said, that right lane between, as you head northbound, that there can be a lot done with restriping, and I just feel like we may have missed that in some of the modeling. Again, I could get behind scenario 3, march off and go forth and come up. I just feel like we may have missed one little thing, one little piece. Again, I think your testimony tells me you're probably not going to get too much more green on the scenario 2, even if we move it around. I'm just worried that we didn't look enough at the 11th and a half entrance, the 11th and a half block of a Safeway entrance, or redoing something like that to see what that traffic flow will get us.
So go ahead.
Yeah, Mayor Gear, I kind of going off of that, I also think that there's, you know, I'm a little hazy on the level that council can take, or the actions council can take when there's already these existing entrances and exits for a business, right? How much can we really determine and tell them that we are changing all of, you know, modifying their parking lot and they're, you know, who's responsible for those improvements or changes. So that I feel like is something that I would like a better understanding of. I also think though that there's also the 13th Street entrance where it's striped the opposite direction, but maybe you can enter there and then exit at 12th and Commercial, and then have those entrance and exits at 11th. I guess my thing is I'm a little concerned with, if we start to, I like the idea of closing the entrance at 12th, less for Safeway, less for actually the intersection of 12th and Commercial, and more for the fact that it's a really unsafe parking lot for pedestrians and drop-offs and things, like once you're actually in the Safeway parking lot. So I feel a little hazy, and are we going down a rabbit hole that we actually don't have the funding and the purview to say we're going to make all these changes, unless we just tell them we're going to pay for everything, right? And I don't think we have that funding available or the desire to do so. So maybe it's an entrance on 13th and only an exit onto the roundabout, which I think Mr. Walters mentioned. I guess I would like a little bit more information on that. I'm inclined, when looking at the modeling, that the roundabout probably does make the most sense. And I understand that we're all sick of roundabouts, but it seems to be the safest option and where we're all going, and deals well with the 24-hour use of the intersection, and not just kind of those peak times. So I just want us to kind of give that a little thought. Are we going, you know, do we really have the latitude to kind of dictate too much when it comes to Safeway, and then the funding to back it up?
So council, would you all be comfortable with saying to this group that basically we think the roundabout design is a good idea, and we approve moving forward in that concept, but we want these other questions answered along the way before we make a final determination? So at least they have a direction to go. Just Would that work for you, Andrew and Brandon? And Tim, can you answer those questions, knowing if the council basically likes the roundabout, at least you know that. I'm just
And
trying
if I
to
could,
move this forward a bit.
I was just going to add also to, just from my judgment as a traffic engineer, when we're talking about potentially closing off or analyzing closing off that Safeway access, I think it would make operations better for the signal alternative. I think the roundabout would still, without having analyzed it, the roundabout would still perform the best of those options. And what else was I gonna, oh, right, there's the redistribution question. By closing that access, you of course redistribute demand. I just tested it real quick in one of the traffic models, just to see what it would do to the 11th and Commercial intersection, the one that's borderline failing. It would blow it up pretty badly. So there would have to be some kind of mitigation there. And then I didn't look at 13th, but I would suspect it would increase delay somewhat there too. That was just my kind of back of the napkin operations analysis here.
So council, any other questions and maybe a direction tonight for the team, or we can ask them to come back. So what are your thoughts? This is a discussion or possible action.
Mayor Gear?
Yes, Mr. Young.
I'm absolutely okay with the trend toward the roundabout. I'm okay with that. I just think that these additional assessments and reviews need to be also brought forward in some capacity to show that we've done our due diligence, just to make sure that in ruling out making any changes, or as Mr. Walters or Ms. Cleveland McGrath or any of the other my fellow council members have said, maybe it's coming out or going in a different way. I just think that it's so important that we as a city consider that, even in a small sense, before we fully commit to one process or another. If we can address that, I'm happy.
Mr. Walters.
Yeah, they're already under contract, and they're really not needing an explicit directive from us at this point. I think that this is mostly a check-in with council. I think that we ought to, by unanimous consent, tell them, go forth and continue your analysis, and come back to us maybe as quickly as possible in a couple of weeks, with more of this data, more of this analysis that we are requesting. But sort of with the understanding that option 3 here is the direction we all think we are really headed.
We have a head nod on that? Okay.
I just think it would be unfortunate if they came back in 6 months ready to go out to bid. I'm thinking sooner than that.
Yeah, as quick as you can, we'll get these questions off the table. And
I think for my part too, from an analysis standpoint, it's not a huge ask, so we should be able to crank that out pretty quickly.
Great.
I think we can easily perform that analysis, and I think also we can look into some of Ms. Cleveland McGrath's questions too on what sort of tools we might have as far as impacting Safeway's access. So we'll dive into both those and bring you guys back something in hopefully a few weeks with a little bit more analysis.
Okay, great. Thank you. Wonderful presentation, Pam and Pete, Brandon and Andrew. Good discussion, council. And unless I hear anything else, we're going to move to the next item on the agenda. So at this time, we're going to move to item 5B, which is a contract award for a combined sewer overflow pump station design number 21-025-SEW-001. This is for discussion and possible action. Mr. Buckemeyer, are you presenting? There you are. Okay.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor and Council. And just to back up one tiny step, that was a great discussion and exactly the kind of interaction that we wanted to have major intersection in town, and I don't want to have these guys do anything that isn't completely vetted and agreed upon by city council. So thank you for that in-depth look at that. Yeah, so this is a contract with HDR to design a CSO pump station, a combined sewer overflow pump station. The contract is in the amount of $592,279.96. It's a time and materials contract with a not to exceed clause. So, and this is really in concert with the outfall project that we're building or designing right now. I explained to City Council or to Public Works Committee a few minutes ago that, or gosh, it's been hours ago now, that the outfall project is really has three elements to it. There's three projects in it. One of those is repairing, replacing, and relocating our existing outfall that was damaged in the storm of 2020. The second element of that is an upsizing that outfall as a first phase of our wastewater treatment plant upgrades. And the third element of it is building a combined sewer overflow pump station that will allow us to convey or pump that storm water into that outfall. That will prevent our SSOs from happening in the downtown area. So with that, this contract will get that final element, I guess, the combined sewer overflow pump station designed and get ready to go out to bid, so it can be built at nearly the same time as the outfall itself is being built. Hope that clears it up.
Questions?
Mayor
Comments?
Gear.
Mr. Miller?
Mr. Buckenmeyer, is this just to 100% design, or is there some physical work?
This takes us through design and through services during construction. That's what I was looking for, that term, yeah. That'd be task number, what is it? Task number 4, task 4,000 in there.
It talks about construction, but then I saw it only goes to 100% design as a deliverable.
That's correct. And it gets us the PS&E documents that gets us going out to bid. And then there's an amount of money in there for services during construction, which I don't have that breakdown in front of me right now.
Because I was initially excited with such a large contract that there was going to be some actual construction, but then I read deliverables 100% issue bid design submittal. So that's the main deliverable. It ends at okay.
Yes, sir. Design and bid documents for that pump station. Yeah.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Walters?
Mr. Buckenmeyer, can you give us some kind of flavor for why it's just so expensive to only design the pump station?
Yes, I think I can. I'll try to do that. This is a bit of a complicated pump station in that it's going to be activated only during those extremely high flows, right? The ones that normally would cause ourselves a backup in the downtown area. So it's going to activate during those periods of time, and has to have a pretty good sized capacity to be able to pump, convey that much water in a short time, so that it doesn't back up into the downtown area. Our rule of thumb is, the design package is roughly 10% of what the project might cost. It's our rule of thumb. There's nothing there, and that's right in line with what we think. This is about a $5 million project when it's all said and done. Just this part of it. But it has to tie into you know, it has to be synchronized with the wastewater plant, right? So that there's some sort of a you know, a meshing of those two flows, so there's a little bit of a complication there also.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Walters.
We've talked about this a little bit at the Public Works Committee, but and I don't know about other council members, but I do think it would be useful if sometime in the near future we did take a step back and looked at all the various projects that we're talking about right now with respect to the wastewater plant.
Yep.
There are quite a number of them, and I think it'd be useful for us to have an understanding of all of them at once, including the pieces that we don't have numbers for yet, and we don't know exactly what they're going to look like.
Okay, so what you're saying is not just the outfall, not just the three elements of the outfall, but also the solids handling project that we're doing.
That and the other element of the outfall, the pond.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Okay, yeah, I was describing that at the Public Works Committee. Sorry, I'll get off track a little bit here, but there's arguably a fourth element to the outfall project, and that's the decommissioning of the existing outfall that goes underneath the port's pond. And what does that look like? Does it look like a total abandonment? Does it look like keeping it in place for emergencies? Does it, you know, whatever? And what part of does that play into, and what part does the port play into that also? What do they want to be left with there?
Yeah.
Mr. Buckermeyer, Mayor Gear,
Yes, Mr. Young.
would you speak a little bit on just for a second or two, on the funding for this project and the cost to the city, just sort of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this part of the project, so as everybody's aware, we are actively seeking FEMA funding for the costs that can be attributed to the disaster that caused the outfall to fail. This cost would not be eligible for FEMA funding. This is something that we would be doing on our own to eliminate the SSO problems that we're having. And our latest bond issue, I believe, included $10 million for at least the beginning funding of the outfall project, which this would be a part of. So.
Okay. More questions for Mr. Buckermeyer? Direction we want to go?
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Miller.
Well, one more time, can you give me the estimated cost of the actual construction? Because again, we're looking at a big number here, and
Yep.
and I appreciate you reminding us of
that.
typical 10%.
Yeah, and that's about as good as I can do right now. That part of this, one of the first phases of this will be to actually develop that engineer's estimate for the construction. But if typical costs are, bear true in this particular case, it'll be about a $5 million pump station.
Okay, yeah, that's what I remember in our discussions about it. I guess I'm hoping there might be some additional info that we can glean when we look at our overall. I think Mr. Walters pointed out our overall. What are we doing in the wastewater treatment?
Mm-hmm.
Because it feels like there's a bunch of different things going on that it's kind of hard for us to keep track, and how much we're spending on various design help is making us a little bit reluctant to make a motion at this point.
Understandable. Yeah. Understandable. Yeah. This is, if it's any help at all, or if I can, so there's really three elements to the outfall project. This is one of those elements that's integral. I mean, the outfall itself doesn't do us any good without this part of it. This is what eliminates those SSO, or does what we can to eliminate those SSOs. This is what gets that stormwater into that outfall.
Mayor Gear?
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. Mr. Buckenmeyer, thinking about the future sometimes helps to put a timeline on things Do we have an idea of how long into the future this project will, I know, crystal ball question, how long this will be good for and effective for, essentially?
Yeah, that's a good question. So so there's a couple elements that this outfall is going to help us with, right? It's going to help with just the effluent from the wastewater plant, right? And this design is going to be sufficient to handle the effluent from during the entire design life of the wastewater plant, right? So when we're total build out, you know, according to our latest comprehensive plan, total build out of the city, this outfall will handle all of that effluent. Now, it's going to do what we can to eliminate our SSOs, right? But we really don't have a control over the climate. So we've upsized it enough to do what the scientists are telling us. They're predicting for increases in rainfall events due to climate change. So we've incorporated that, but it's not to say we don't, you know, that's not exceeded someday. So if that helps or not, but yeah.
It does. And is this something that ecology will sign off on? Do we have some regulatory agencies that will have to approve this?
And they have already eagerly endorsed what we're doing as far as upsizing the outfall, getting a pump station in, and getting the effluent off the street and where it should be.
Great, thank you. That is helpful.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Miller.
Just one last question, but that's essentially what we're paying HDR to do to make sure we design the appropriate
Exactly.
size and
Exactly. Yeah. There's also, I'll throw in, there's also, the other thing they're going to look at with this contract is we have an existing CSO outfall that runs, you know, basically under the synchro lift of where the port is there. This will also look at the decommissioning and elimination of that also. So I guess it's not just the building of that pump station, the one we talked about.
Mayor Gear.
Mr. Miller.
I move the city council authorize the mayor to sign the contract as presented with HDR Engineering in the amount of $592,279.96 to perform combined sewer outflow pump station design.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Miller, a second by Ms. Moulton. Any other discussion? Ms. Hunt, would you take the vote?
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Walters,
Yes.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath,
Yes.
Ms. Moulton,
Yes.
Mr. McDougall,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Carter,
Yes.
motion carries.
Thank you, Ms. Hunt.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Fred. At this time, we'll move on to item 5C. It's our finance update. It's a discussion item, and then we'll roll into item D, ordinance 3083, both to be presented by Mr. Hoagland, our finance director. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, and members of the audience. Let me share my screen real quick. I'll jump over to this PowerPoint I put together. So which one of those screens do you see?
Both of them.
Okay. How about now?
Same. Now we have the big screen.
Okay, so I put together a year in review in pictures from the finance department.
But Steve, it's really big. It doesn't quite fit. It's overflowing.
Okay, let's do that. Year in review in pictures in the finance department. So we started the year, coronavirus set in, things started declining, things got bad. Then we got some grants, and Then online shopping exceeded historical norms. Construction stayed strong. Towards the end of the year, revenues picked up and we ended the year better than expected. So that's your year in a quick snapshot for the finance department. So a couple of these things I wanted to remind council back in March 2020 when the coronavirus set in, we had a budget amendment of $1.6 million to reduce the budget across almost every fund to conserve resources. And council will remember we reallocated a bunch of resources back to the general fund to concentrate on providing basic services. We also implemented a hiring freeze, equipment purchase freeze and deferrals, and other conservation and sequestration measures, which all are still in place at this time. Later on, towards mid-year, we were notified of some grant opportunities. So we were allocated what ended up being about $720,000 in grants from the CARES Act, in addition to $100,000 through the CDBG program for local business relief, $100,000 from FEMA for EMS relief. An anonymous donor gave another $100,000 for small business relief. So in total, in 2020, we had over $1 million, nearly 1.1 million in COVID-related grants. So all of, excuse me, all of those additional resources were not budgeted for, but they all flowed through the city accounting system. So, and I don't think any of this is a surprise to council. It's just at this point, what we're doing is what you'll see at the end of the presentation is a budget amendment to get our budget caught up with what actually took place during the year. But it resulted in excess spending that was not foreseen at the time when COVID set in and when we did our budget amendment. And you'll see that in more detail. We'll talk about that in a little bit in information systems, planning, and facilities. So again, the end result is ordinance number 3083, which we'll talk about in more detail in a little bit. I did want to talk about our primary tax revenue streams. This is a chart that you probably remember. I show this frequently, but it shows our 7 largest tax revenue streams. And when you look at it in total, the total of all of these were almost exactly on budget. The actuals came in at 16.576 million against 16.569 million in estimated revenues, which I found really remarkable. But you'll see some of these, like property tax, utility tax, were slightly over budget, sales tax slightly under budget, and some of these revenue streams are restricted. For example, real estate excise tax and criminal justice sales tax. But I thought that was remarkable and I wanted to share that. We'll go into detail in several of these revenue streams. So starting with sales tax, this chart shows the monthly revenues against the monthly budget and the accumulated budget against the accumulated actual receipts. So this bottom row here in black font, this is the monthly receipt of sales tax revenues. And keep in mind, the sales tax receipt comes to the city the second month after the sale is made. So for example, March receipts are from sales that were made in January. February receipts are from sales that were made in December. So we started the year, and you see January, February, March, all started out, even April, all started out pretty strong. So 16% above budget in January, we're 7% down in February, but then 7.5% up in March, down 0.9 in April. So through a third of the year, we're still up 16, 17% over budget. So we started the year really strong. So May is the first month that we had sales tax receipt that were affected by COVID. Remember, the COVID crisis kind of set in March, and the quarantine orders went into place mid-March. So you can see that affected May sales tax pretty significantly. We're down 18.7% compared to the monthly budget. But when looking at the yearly budget, because we started the year so strong, we were only down 1.7% compared to the total year-to-date budget at that point, which is $31,000. June was even down further at 30.6%, and At that point, we're down 6.8% to the year, 152,000 below what we were anticipating. And then I found it remarkable how quickly sales tax kind of rebounded. I mean, it's still down, but it's no longer dropping at an accelerating rate. So it was down 5.8% in July, 9.7% in August, and then in September it started to come back up, down 3.2%. October was up 0.4%, and then both November and December were above what we had budgeted for. So we ended the year 3.3% below budget for the year, which from a materiality standpoint, we generally consider 10% to be the materiality threshold. So if your estimates or your numbers are within 10%, we kind of figure that's, you're not materially off. So I thought this was actually best case scenario for us. Although 3.3% of almost 5 million, it's still a big number, $163,000 that we were anticipating to receive that we didn't. The biggest sectors of the sales tax generators, the retail sales market, all other miscellaneous store retailers. So, and this NACSAS code includes the online shopping platforms. So one thing I was going to mention, let me jump back to this. So you can see in January of 2020, so this is pre-COVID, our sales tax receipt was $400,099. Just the end of last week, we received January sales tax data for 2021, and that was almost 397,000. So it was off by less than 1% of what it was in January of 2020. So I don't want to jinx it, but that's like kind of back to pre-COVID levels. What was interesting, so looking at this for 2020, the top sales tax producer, other miscellaneous retailers, which includes the online platforms, January of last year, that was the fifth highest producer. January of this year, that was the #1 producer of sales tax revenues. But this is looking at 2020. Second is boat dealers, car dealers, construction, and hospitality round out the top 10 there. So something I was thinking about when I was looking at sales tax, when we put together our revenue projections, we budget pretty conservatively. So generally at the end of the year, our sales tax revenue comes in higher than what we have budgeted. And I was thinking about this from a cash flow standpoint. So looking at the last 5 years of sales tax revenues, 2016 we budgeted 3.648, we brought in 3.945, 8% above budget. 2017 was 7%, 18 was 8.2%, and then 2019 is 2.3%. This year we came in 3.3% under budget. And I was thinking, thinking of the cost of COVID, because there certainly was a cost to us, what we generally would have expected to see maybe 3% over budget in our sales tax revenues, that would have given us an additional 148,000 in revenues, which would be cash in above what we had projected, rather than 163,000 below what we were projecting. And that net is 311,000. That's kind of the way I was thinking of it. I think COVID cost us over 300,000 in sales tax revenue in 2020.
So Mr. Hoagland, can I add in 16, 17, and 18, I believe that had a lot to do with the high school project, those really big numbers.
Yeah, the high school is still,
that infused a lot of cash that, went away in 19 because the high school was done. So it's not like the whole economy changed in 19. It's just that big project was finished. So.
Okay, so I want to talk a little more about utility tax as well. So in our first chart here, you can see utility tax. We ended the year 1.3% above budget, which is great. The downside to that is, and we've talked about this in the past, it's kind of a refresher. We've seen utility tax on the private side, the private utilities dropping off for several years now. So we have We have two sets of utility tax charged to private utilities, which is electricity, gas, telephone, and cable TV, and then utility tax charged on the public utilities, which is the city utilities, water, sewer, storm, and garbage. So we had seen year-over-year decreases on the private side. So we budgeted, this little screenshot over here, we budgeted private utility tax to be 5% less than it was in 2019. We were budgeting for a decrease. In 2020, actuals came in at 0.8% less than the prior year. So we were actually 4.2% over budget, which is fine. We budgeted appropriately, but the point is that revenue stream is decreasing and continues to decrease. What we saw in 2020 on the public utility side, generally that utility tax revenue stream exceeds budget. Council will remember that we've had step rate increases in place for water, sewer, and storm. In the case of water for several years now. So the utility tax is applied against the gross cost of the bill. So it's easy to see how that utility tax stream increases from year to year. Generally, it runs several percent over what we budgeted. This year, the 2020 actuals were 2.9% over the prior year, which was 1.4% under budget. So we collected less public utility tax than what we budgeted. We generally see 5, 6, 7% increases over the prior year. This year, it was only 2.9%. So overall, utility tax exceeds budget by 1.3%. But again, it's something that we will keep an eye on because that is a shrinking revenue stream. So on the public side, I wanted to point this out. This is the consumption. I'm sorry I don't have a graphic for this. I'll have to work on that. It's hard, I know, to look at this raw data. But this is the water consumption in cubic feet sold in 2019 versus 2020. So this set of bars on the left side is 2019. The left bar here, that's the total sold January through December for all of these wholesale customers, plus the retail segment in the city. Total of 95.4 million cubic feet sold in 2019. In 2020, that dropped to 92.1 million cubic feet. And you can see every sector across the board had a decrease. Industrials, our wholesale customers, and the retail sector. The commercial, you can see the commercial sector here down 4.2 million, a decrease of over 10%. I think it was over 11% compared to the prior year. But overall, nearly 3% decrease in consumption in water, and sewer consumption is calculated off of water consumption. So it's easy to see why that utility tax didn't perform as strongly in 2020 as we were anticipating.
With the commercial retail portion, because most of the restaurants were closed.
Exactly. Yep, absolutely. Building permits, talk about this real briefly. You can see 2020, again, was a strong year in the building sector. We sold 57 building permits at a total revenue of $668,000, very comparable to the prior year, where we sold 52 permits at $618,000. 2018, I thought this was interesting. I figured out the averages, and I wrote them down over here. So the total number of permits issued over the 8-year average is 86, which we sold less than the 8-year average. But the average revenues over that same period was $643,000, which we exceeded that. So indicating that the average value of homes for those permits has increased over the last several years. Okay, so this is looking at our the calculation of our rainy day fund. So our fund balance policy is established in Ordinance 2995, and it outlines how the city's general fund emergency reserve is calculated. So it directs that an amount equal to 20% of the year's expenditures from these 7 operating funds: the general fund, parks, cemetery, library, road maintenance, Washington Park, and EMS. So 20% of those combined expenditures be set aside in the general fund for the following year's emergency reserve. So what that looks like for 2020 is right here. Fund 001 is the general fund at 18.8 million in expenditures, parks at 1.6. So the total of those 7 funds equals 28.3 million. So 20% of that is 5.6 million, 5,673,000. So the 2020 balance, the prior year balance, was set at 5.4 million. So an adjustment is required of 211,000. So you can see how that calculation is set up as the budgets, or as the actual expenditures increase year over year, that rainy day fund increases as well. So an adjustment required of 211,000, that'll bring the emergency reserve fund to 5.6 million. We have other restricted cash in the general fund of 442,000, leaving operating cash of 769,000. So that gives a total of 6.885 million of cash in the general fund. This is just a snapshot a year apart, looking at January 1st, 2020 cash in the general fund, January 1st, 2021, after doing this calculation of the rainy day fund. So the blue being the emergency reserve, the orange being other restricted cash, and the gray being the operating cash. And at the end of 2020, going into 2021, we have about 769,000 in operating cash. I will say that will change through our year-end reconciliations. There's a number of things that will impact that cash. The largest one is we do a reconciliation of the administrative overhead charges. And what that is, the utilities rely on the general fund for administrative functions such as finance, legal, engineering, facilities, things like that. So they don't have to go hire their own attorney or their own finance people. They just use what's available at the city, but they pay for that through budget allocation. So that reconciliation, we always budget that very conservatively. We'll do a reconciliation at the end of the year to true it up to what those actuals were. That would probably bring a little bit more cash back into the general fund. This is another emergency reserve update. So council will remember last year, the end of the year, the storm drain fund was out of operating cash, and we took a loan from the water fund at 90,000 and used the emergency reserve cash that the storm drain had on hand of 118,000. So again, established by ordinance 2995, the utilities has a different calculation for figuring out emergency reserve, and each of the utilities has its own emergency reserve fund, and that's equal to 10% of the previous year's revenues. So what that looked like for the storm drain fund, at the end of this year, I wrote the simple little calculation over here, the pre-repay. So this is what, if you looked at the trial balance, how much cash was sitting in the storm drain fund at the end of the year before we did any of these paybacks. So there's 248,000 in operating cash, 406,000 in capital cash. So after our repayment, so the water fund loan was a 3-year loan we used 1.58% interest because that's what the 3-year treasury was paying at that time. Just use simple interest calculation. So we have a total payback of 94,266. The fund balance policy also requires that if the emergency reserve is used, it needs to be paid back within 3 years. So we're paying a third of both of these balances here during this payback. So we have 248,000 in cash. We'll pay a third of the emergency reserve back. That's 39,000. We'll pay a third of the loan back to the water fund, That's another 31,000. So this is what our cash picture is in the storm drain fund after that. 177,000 in operating cash, 406,000 capital cash, 39,000 in emergency cash, and our loan balance is now down to 62,000. Okay, so this is a quick look at how each of the funds ended the year, revenues versus expenditures. And I use the term up here, made and lost. We don't make a profit or lose, you know, in government, but for lack of a better term, if we had revenues that exceeded expenditures, I refer to that as made. If expenditures exceeded revenues, I refer to that as lost. And that would be in red font with the parentheses. So one thing I'll point out, and I wrote that over here in this edit field over here, I did not include the general fund in this. In the general fund, we have a lot of revenue streams and a lot of expenditure streams that we accrue. In fact, we have 2 months worth of accruals in the general fund for sales tax revenues. And we post those accruals into our accounting system because it makes it easier for the auditors to run year-end revenue and expenditure reports, and then they tie directly to the annual report. But it makes it harder to look at our cash position that way, and it makes it hard timing-wise because it would be March before we could take a look at the results of the general fund. So what I prefer to do is what we did here, looking at our cash position, so we know what our cash in and cash out was, and what our year-end results are, and that's what we talked about right here. So we ended the year, down. We started the year with 2 million in operating cash. We ended with about 770,000 in cash. But keeping in mind, this is the financing strategy that we had in place to continue the fiber backbone build out. So this budget is working. But the rest of the funds, we can take a look. They don't have those same accruals. All of the rest of these funds, if they have tax revenues, they're property taxes, and we don't have the same accrual issue with property taxes because the majority of those revenues are receipted in by November. There's a very small amount that comes in December, but it's de minimis and doesn't impact the end result. So looking down the line here, if you see a fund with a red number at the end, that means revenues that means expenditures exceeded revenues brought in for the year. And the first case here is the TBD, the Transportation Benefit District Fund. This was a planned use of money. That's restricted revenue that goes into the road maintenance fund. So we started the year with 192,000 in cash, and that was just additional revenues that was funneled into the road maintenance fund. So planned use of resources there. Same thing with the impact fees. We used 582,000 more than we brought in, and that was to fund the Oaks Avenue roundabout. And this is looking at it in total impact fees. Remember, we have road impact fees, park impact fees, and fire impact fees. So that covered the Oaks Avenue roundabout, the cemetery project in the Parks Department, and the Picket Pocket Park in the Parks Department. The ACFL fund, we used a little bit more than we brought in. This is less than 1% of the budget, very reasonable use of budget. Water fund 2.1, you'll remember we paid down a lot of our debt, so that was a planned use of revenue as well. And again, in the solid waste fund, we used 40,000 more that we brought in. Again, less than 1% of budget, well within a reasonable use of reserves. Okay, so that's looking at revenues versus expenditures. And this is looking at actual budget. So on the budget, so this budget amendment is just for legal compliance. This is this is what's important to me. I mean, there's several parts to the budget, right? You adopt the budget, you're following the budget during the year, but this is monitoring the budget is how you ensure that you're not overspending. The budget is there to make sure you don't spend more than you can afford. And you can see from the results of the year, almost all of the funds ended up with revenues exceeding expenditures, and all of the funds have healthy reserves going into 2021. But for legal compliance, we do need to have budgets at the fund level within budget, so expenditures within that spending authority. And I think council has been made aware of all of these things as we've been going through the year. This is a matter of housekeeping to get the budget document cleaned up, if you will. So in the general fund, I listed over here in this text box some of the major items in the general fund. So in the IT department, we purchased an additional hyper-convergence server, additional laptops for staff and planning commission for remote work, and conversion to Office 365 were all expenditures that drove that department this year. And you remember, and so let me take a half step back. Keep in mind, this adjusted budget is after that $1.6 million budget amendment that we went through. You can see in parks here, they started the year with a $2.2 million budget, ended the year with a $2,081,000 budget. Cemetery, same thing. Library, 1.54. The adjusted budget 1.507. So a number of these funds took big hits during that budget amendment. Library. Okay, so library, $9,484 over budget, well within budget considering the adopted budget. There were a couple things that happened in the library, and one of them was COVID spending, supplies related to managing the COVID crisis that were reimbursed by the CARES grant, so no net effect. And we did have some staff turnover that created some wage issues in one of the BARS numbers. The road construction, this is a carryover specifically from the Oaks Avenue roundabout. That project was first talked about, I think, in 2018, and it's rolled every year. It is complete now, but slightly over budget in that fund. Sorry, the fund is slightly over budget of the actuals over the adjusted budget. Dropping down to the EMS fund, over budget by 26,000. So over here, where I refer to the write-offs to the GEMT program, the council may remember a couple of years ago, the federal government started providing additional revenues for Medicare transports, and it was an additional, pardon?
It's Medicaid.
Medicaid?
Yep.
And that's an additional set of billing that is required to take place. And in the EMS fund, the amount that is paid by the insurance carrier against the actual charge, that difference for Medicare and Medicaid. So the Medicare would be in the standard billings, the Medicaid in the GEMT, but those differences have to be written off. It's against the law to actually try and pursue that additional funding from the customers. So that was a new element in our budgeting that we didn't capture correctly in that first round of budgeting. Impact fees, again, carryover related to the Oaks Avenue and the Picket Pocket Park. In the ACFL, over budget by 12,000. This was due to initially removing the seasonal staff out of that budget. Once we got into the heart of the summer, things were not as bad as they were looking earlier in the year. So we did bring on a few seasonal staff. And then
and the forest lands were being run over at that point. We needed staff there. because it's the one place the community hung out all summer.
Right, right. And then solid waste, this was, part of this was a budgeting oversight. So a couple of years ago, the auditors made a recommendation for utility tax to book the utility tax revenue into the utility and then book the expense out of the utility back into the general fund. And the solid waste, in addition to the general fund, there's utility tax that goes into the road maintenance fund. And that was just an oversight on our budgeting part. It's no net effect. It's in and out. We used to just carve that payment out when the utility billing receipt came in, put it directly into the other fund. That's an in and out. And then the tonnage was set a little bit low. I talked with Will about this now that he's, at any rate, it was set a little bit low, but keeping in mind it was a 2-year budget that we're dealing with. So it was in 2018 when we were making these estimates, but that's something that will probably be coming back this year to make an adjustment on, because those were set low for 2021 as well. So this last slide that I have, I wrote over here in this text box, these are the bars numbers that will be adjusted. I apologize, there's not a single bars number there. So the screenshot I did, I captured the description and the amounts, but not the bars number. But it comes directly from this ordinance matrix. So these are all of the bars numbers in the general fund that I'm requesting budget adjustment on, and these are the offsetting resources. So contributions and donations of 250,000. That's you'll remember the senior center roof. We got a very generous anonymous donation of 150,000 plus the 100,000 the donor made for small business support. Fiber revenues were under budgeted, federal grants, and then unassigned fund balance to round out the balance of these requests. Fund 103 is the library. We talked about 105 is road construction. We talked about 110 is EMS. 112 is impact fees. 108 is the parks construction. This is where the Pickett Pocket Park was worked out of, using 50,000 of impact fees, which is down here. Oh, this other part I wanted to point out. So there was some storm drain work done on the Oaks Avenue roundabout, and that was initially charged to Fund 105. So this budget amendment right here corresponds to a journal entry that we did to essentially repay the road fund for that storm portion of work that was done there on that project. And then ACFL and solid waste funds here. So happy to answer any questions or revisit anything if council has questions or concerns.
Okay. So Steve, you can move into, go ahead. Is there a question?
Not a question so much as I just wanted to thank Mr. Hoagland for whenever he brings a major report like this to council, just the level of detail and the clarity is always really impressive. So thank you. This has been a great report to dig into.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so then if there's no other comments, we'll move on to item 5D, which is ordinance 3083, amending the 2020 budget. Mr. Hoagland, you want to walk us through that?
Yeah, so this is, so it goes kind of hand in hand with this last chart where I inadvertently omitted the bars numbers. But this is, yeah, I'm happy to go if council would like more detail on any of these, maybe in the general fund. So this first section up here are all general fund items. So we're, and this comes, so we're over fund, or I'm sorry, we're over budget in the general fund by 828,000. What I've done is identified a number of bars numbers within departments that were over budget. We've never been really questioned by the auditors or anybody else about the way we budget compliance at the fund level, but it is possible that they could nitpick that the general fund should be within budget at the department level. It's not an unreasonable kind of expectation, I guess. But this would accomplish that. So the professional services, this is within the legislative budget, primarily represents voter fees that the county charges. It was the amount of voter fees, voter registration charges that we paid this year was much higher than what we were expecting. It was nearly 60,000. And the main things in here are those voter registration fees and the conversion of our agenda software to Civic Clerk. 001220 is the IT department. This 185 represents those items we talked about, the server, additional laptops, etc. 240 is the planning department. This the 001240 and the 240,000. So that's that represents primarily those local business grants that pass through. So both through the CDBG grant and the donor. 001260, this 580,000, that's the fire department. 001320, overtime, the 70,000, that's in the fire department. And I didn't dig into this. We are normally pretty accurate on our fire, not just fire, we're normally pretty accurate on our overtime projections because we look at prior year's overtime and make an estimate based on that. So I don't know if we just got it wrong. My suspicion is that we had more overtime in the fire department because of COVID-related absences. And then 001713, this is the facilities department. So the senior center roof is in there, and the majority of purchasing for the COVID-related items, the PPE and the signage and equipment related to.
Steve, we're looking at slide 15. Do you want us to be looking at slide 16?
Can you not see this?
We're seeing the previous slide, the year-end finance where you went over general fund, but we're not seeing the slide 16. I think that's what you've been reading to us.
Sorry, I was.
Right there, that one.
Do you not see this Word document?
We see it now, but we did not see it a minute ago.
Oh, geez. All right.
We're seeing the PowerPoint, Steve.
Man, I apologize.
It's okay. All of a sudden I thought, wait, where,
Okay.
There you go.
Can you see the ordinance now?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that. You can see how that would be confusing. So Fund 001713, this is the facilities department within the general fund. As I was saying, in addition to the senior center roof, which was huge project, they worked out of this department. The majority of purchasing for COVID-related items ran through facilities as well. All of the PPE and signage that we use here at City Hall, the defogging machines, the air purifying machines, all that stuff ran through this department. So do you want me to run through these again?
Anybody have questions on that? No, we're good.
Same document was in the packet, so.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm happy to answer any questions or whatever else council may have.
Mayor Gear,
Yes, Mr. McDougall.
I missed it. There were a couple two different federal grants line items. There was the larger one up in the general fund, and then a smaller one in another fund. Was that just also like COVID relief, but for like the water utility?
Here, I'll go back to that. Yeah, so here, the larger federal grant in the general fund. We had additional, COVID spending in the library as well. And
that's what that was.
Yeah, and that's what that is. In the Fund 105, this was a different federal grant, the grant funding the Ship Harbor Roundabout.
That's right. Okay.
Then there was also, I guess I don't have it illustrated here. There was also a FEMA grant that supported Fund 110, the EMS fund. I don't have it illustrated here on the on this worksheet, but that was nearly 100,000 as well, and that was really nice. It was just essentially for revenue replacement in the EMS fund for ambulance transports.
Got it. Thank you.
Oh, the one other thing I was going to point out, the timing of this, our open period ran through last Wednesday, and actually that's why I'm coming with this kind of late in the game, if you will, as well as not getting this published until this weekend, because we did have changes right up until that last minute. The last payment for the roundabout actually got put into the system on Wednesday, so it just made that 2020 cutoff, and that's in the voucher list that was approved in the council packet tonight. So this is literally the last day of the open period, February 1st.
Additional questions? Action?
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Young?
In lieu of any other comments, I move to adopt ordinance 3083, amending the 2020 budget.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Young, a second by Mr. McDougall. Any other discussion? Ms. Hunt, would you take the vote?
Mr. Walters?
Yes.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath?
Yes.
Ms. Moulton?
Yes.
Mr. McDougall?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Carter?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you all. Really great meeting. Is there anything else for the good of the order tonight? Okay, so now we need to smile. They're going to get a screenshot. And no, a real smile, Mr. Walters. Come on. Yeah, that's it. And this will be part of our State of the City, all of us doing business on Zoom. Okay, I'm going to assume they took our picture. Have a really good evening.
Thank you.
And the meeting is adjourned. Good night.
Good night.
Night.